Order. Welcome everybody to this oral evidence session of the Education Select Committee. This is the second of two evidence sessions that we are holding as a committee on the topic of screen time and social media. And the purpose of these two sessions is to enable the committee to be informed in the contribution that we want to submit to the government's consultation on screen time and social media, which is currently underway. So we're very grateful to our witnesses for being with us this morning, and particularly as some of our witnesses are sharing direct personal experience of the impact that the lack of regulation of screen time and social media has had on their lives to date. So we are grateful for that. I will invite our witnesses in turn to introduce yourselves to us this morning, and if you would make any relevant declarations about the funding that you or your organisation receive for the work that you're doing in this area. I hope you'll understand why transparency on that is important for this debate. I'll start with Rani Govender, if that's okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rani Govender. I'm an Associate Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the NSPCC, and I lead our Child Safety Online team. On the financial matter, at the NSPCC, around 85% of our income comes from supporters. We also receive funding from corporate partnerships, trusts and statutory sources. In terms of our research and work into Child Safety Online in particular, we're supported by the Oak Foundation, whose support funds a substantial part of our research in this space. I also want to note that the NSPCC has a corporate partnership with Vodafone. This partnership helps to support our funding our resources to professionals and some of our youth participation work. It does not fund our policy research into Child Safety Online, and it has no impact on our policy development in this space.
Thank you very much. Esther Ghey.
Hi, my name's Esther Ghey. I'm the founder and director of the Brianna Ghey Legacy Project. With regards to funding, we receive funding from I knew I was going to struggle with this one, philanthropic sources, along with public funding, public fundraising, and also local business support in Warrington.
Thank you very much. Andy Burrows.
Good morning. I'm Andy Burrows, Chief Exec of Molly Rose Foundation, and thank you for facilitating me appearing virtually. MRS funding comes from three main sources. We are heavily reliant on trust and foundations, also including the Oak Foundation and the likes of the Royal Foundation. We also are reliant on public fundraising and individual donations. And I would draw to the committee's attention that we've received funds from two anonymous donations, and there have been media reports linking those to Meta and Pinterest. I'd just like to offer some additional context on that as much as I can, because the committee might be aware that there has been attempts to question our independence and also to impugn at times the motives of the foundation and the family in respect to the ongoing debates. So what I would say is that Meta and Pinterest were the two companies that the coroner in Molly's inquest ruled played a direct contributory role to her death. The family have been clear that they would not ever want to benefit financially as a result of Molly's death, and that instead of pursuing legal action, the family want to pursue change through the Molly Rose Foundation. So I hope that gives you some context on some of that reporting.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll begin our questioning this morning with a question for Esther. You founded the Brianna Ghey Legacy Project in memory of your daughter and launched the Phone Free Education campaign following her murder in 2023. Can you tell the committee about the role that harmful content online played in your daughter's death?
Yes, so I'll start by telling you how it actually impacted the last 2 years of her life. So Brianna really struggled with her mental health, which was a result of her smartphone addiction and social media addiction. She was self-harming and she had an eating disorder to the point of where she was hospitalised due to the amount of weight that she lost. It was after her death that I found out that she was actually accessing content online that was encouraging her to do this. She was increasingly isolated due to her being excluded from school because of her phone use. She could not put a phone away. She would refuse to put a phone away. She would go to the toilet to film TikTok videos. She would be texting other children in class. And because of this as well, she also she wouldn't engage with health professionals or other youth groups either. So there was times when I tried to get her involved in youth activities outside of school, such as there's an organisation called TAGS, which is a trans and gay youth organisation in Warrington. She went a couple of times and she refused to engage, and then she went back home into a room completely isolated and on social media to the people that were doing her harm in the first place. And just to say that Brianna's case is not isolated. I've been working closely with the NASUWT, and their members are increasingly telling us that social media is a key factor behind worsening behaviour in schools, with 59% in their 2025 survey identifying it as the main driver. In secondary schools, around 2/3 of teachers say it affects pupil behaviour, and even in primary schools, nearly half report the same, despite children being below the age of consent for most of these platforms. Teachers are also saying that children arrive tired and irritable, struggling to follow the rules and finding it harder to communicate. Many also link excessive social media use to loss of interest in learning, and warn that disrespectful and sometimes cruel behaviour that young people see online is becoming normalised in how they treat each other. Is it okay for me to read 3 quotes from teachers as well, quickly? They're only short.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to take all the time. So 2 are from secondary schools and the 3rd is from primary schools. So pupils feeling extreme social pressures, pupils with extremely low self-esteem and constant reliance on positive feedback via social media. Students go down rabbit holes and end up on sites that offer detrimental advice, spread hate and misinformation. And this is one that really stood out to me. Children are watching violent and sexual behaviour on the internet. This behaviour is being seen replayed in schools. The number of pupils displaying sexualised behaviour has increased hugely. I teach 6 and 7-year-olds. So it's not only me, it's not only Brianna who has been impacted by this, but it's every child in our country.
Thank you very much for that. So you might have seen that last week we had some of the social media companies in front of us, and we'll be hearing from another one later this morning. Do you think social media companies are doing enough to protect children from online harms?
No, and I don't think that they're admitting that there's online harms or that their platforms are addictive. So, yeah, complete lack of any moral responsibility.
Thank you. And you published a statement this week, Esther, about your engagement with the government, or lack of engagement with the government, criticising the Prime Minister for not having met with you. Could you just tell us this morning what difference such a meeting would make to you at this time?
It's not just for me, it's for other bereaved families as well. So I think I have 13 other families that have signed the letter. I have met Sir Keir Starmer prior to him becoming Prime Minister, and I think that it would be really useful for him to hear from bereaved families about their experiences to really understand what is going on in his country, in the country.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Peter for our next question. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, the Molly Rose Foundation campaigns for the removal of harmful content from social media following the tragic death of Molly Russell in 2017. Can you tell us how harmful online content contributed to the circumstances surrounding Molly's suicide?
Yes, so Molly was 14 when she died in November 2017. It took almost 5 years for Molly's inquest to take place. That was largely because of delays from tech companies in providing information. But we know that Molly had been algorithmically recommended substantial amounts of harmful material, including content that promotes and glorifies suicide. We know that she was exposed to at least 2,000 posts on Instagram in the 6 months before she died. In reality, that figure is likely to be far higher. the impact was really cumulative in nature. And as someone who has subsequently spent time on accounts opened in the guise of a 15-year-old, I can tell you that, kind of that content being bombarded so that your feed is post after post of material that is recommending suicide, promoting suicide methods, promoting self-harm, or feeding a sense of helplessness and despair is deeply claustrophobic. So Molly's death, and at the inquest, it was ruled that social media played a not insignificant contributory role in Molly's death. It's the first time that we're aware that a coronial court has made that finding a fact. Was a tragedy, but 8 years later, it is one that we know continues to take place. We lose a young person to suicide every week in the UK, where technology plays a role, and the research that MRF has undertaken has shown that actually very little has changed, and on platforms such as Instagram and TikTok in particular, children are still being exposed to a continual barrage of harmful content, and in many respects that content is more impactful and more dangerous than it was 8 years ago. So having heard the evidence from the tech companies last week, where Instagram, for example, was quoting its teen accounts, look, the reality is you can open an account as a 15-year-old and continue to be algorithmically recommended substantial amounts of harmful content. And 2/3 of the measures that Instagram talk about in their teen accounts, our research has shown either are substantially ineffective or just couldn't be triggered at all when being tested.
Andy, that's really helpful to hear. You've already mentioned the evidence we took from social media companies last week, where they asserted that they've done a huge amount to protect children online already, that their algorithms are designed to promote positive content, not the most emotionally stimulating. Do you accept those points, and more broadly, do you think social media companies are doing enough in the present moment to protect children from online harms?
Social media companies have demonstrably failed to take children's safety and basic safeguarding norms into account. There is an utter absence of safety by design, and fundamentally this is because the incentives on tech platforms are not there for them to prioritise child safety and well-being, whether that is in terms of reducing exposure to harm, or more positively in terms of being able to offer a safer, more nourishing experience. Further research that we undertook just before the Online Safety Act came into force showed that 48% of girls, 1 in 2 girls aged 13 to 17, had been exposed to harmful content, that is suicide, self-harm, intense depression or eating disorder content in the previous week. So, listening to the evidence that the companies gave last week, was really what we've seen for many years, an exercise in PR lines and performative steps rather than meaningful action. And I would say, I'm sure we will get on to, what the next steps should be, but ultimately, the Online Safety Act is not doing enough right now to force companies to meaningfully change their design choices and commercial decisions. And until we set the incentives, whatever policy solutions we adopt, until we set the incentives that meaningfully force a change in the culture and the design decisions and the commercial motivations of these companies, child safety will always be a secondary priority for them.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mark Suez next.
Thank you. It's a very good time, I think, to ask this question. So, as you know, representatives from TikTok, Meta and Roblox told this committee last week that a ban for social media for under 16s would be difficult to enforce and might push young people into darker, unregulated spaces online. Andy, the Molly Rose Foundation has previously argued that a blanket ban on social media for under 16s wouldn't be the best option. So what alternatives to a ban do you think would provide sufficient protection for children online, and what evidence would you point to support that view?
So I would firstly say, what we can see from Australia and our research there is that this is a matter of the platforms demonstrating malign compliance. The technology, the age assurance technology, is there to be doing a far better job than the companies so far have done. But look, what parents, I think, say universally are two things. Firstly, they want to see decisive action. It is clear that parents' patience has snapped, and rightly so, but they also want to have confidence that the next steps in terms of policy solutions will be decisive and they can have confidence that they will work. And that is why we are concerned that a ban will not deliver. In Australia, we are seeing 3 in 5 children still being able to have access to at least one active account. Half of children say that they don't feel any safer, and 1 in 7 children say that they feel less safe. So look, for us, the reality is that, if we cannot have confidence that a ban will be watertight, then children will continue to be on these platforms. And until and unless we make sure that these platforms are safe by design, then the reality would be that children would be continuing to come to the same harms that we see now. The algorithmic recommendation of harmful content, child sexual abuse and grooming, which continues to escalate markedly.
Understood.
So it is only if we can fundamentally shift the incentives on platforms so they have a clear overarching responsibility that we can see meaningful action being taken. And look, what I would say, and what we've been calling for, is we are talking about some of the largest and most cash-rich companies in the world. So the Online Safety Act in respect of suicide and self-harm content indicated that platforms should be spending the equivalent of what Meta spent for a couple of weeks to advertise on the side of the IMAX on the South Bank in Waterloo on adjusting their algorithms for suicide and self-harm. Until we regulate these companies effectively, and I think the clear parallel is to the way that we regulated banks after the 2008 crash, until the financial incentives are there, and the broader stack is there in terms of making platforms recognise that regulation is not just something to pay lip service to, then we will regrettably just see more of the same.
Okay. Just to push you on that point, though, what specifically do you want to see in place of a ban? Because a ban is pretty clear, isn't it? It's pretty unambiguous. And if you're saying these tech companies are subverting it in Australia, despite it being clear and specific, then surely they just subvert the suggestions that you're going to make. So what is it specifically you'd like us to do?
Well, I think that is the exact point. When we look at Australia, with this being a signature policy of the Albanese government, when this is something that is, a world-leading experiment, the companies have still been able to subvert this through malign compliance. And that is because, the sanctions, frankly, are not there. So we need to see a significantly strengthened act where, the regime applies with tough sanctions, where this applies and we learn lessons from financial services. And I'm thinking there, for example, of the senior manager regime, so that there are clear personal incentives on senior decision makers in the platforms. Until we change the culture and until we change the incentives, whether we are looking at regulation or whether we are looking at a ban, we cannot expect the outcomes that we need. These companies are just too big to be able to take sticking plaster solutions in respect of.
Thank you very much for that. And to Esther, thank you so much for your evidence today and for coming to the committee today as well. We really appreciate it. Now, you have specifically campaigned for age restrictions on social media to protect children from online harm. How do you think an age restriction would help? And what are your thoughts on the concerns raised by organisations last week about the limitations and risks of a social media ban?
Thank you. I would like to see the age range. We were having a discussion before, and the NSPCC, sorry, I'm speaking on your behalf now, are suggesting different age ranges for different social media platforms, and I think that I can agree with that. However, at the moment, I think that most of the social media platforms that we have do need to be raised to 16. Just to also extend on what Andy was saying before, so Sorry, I've just lost my notes. In March 2026, this is in Australia, the e-safety commissioner reported that 2/3 of parents of teens on social media report no age verification process was required, and complaints indicate platforms often fail to act when underage accounts are reported. So we know that that is an issue, and again, it's social media companies not complying to the regulations in Australia. So this is something that we need to do better, but it doesn't mean that we don't do this. Early non-compliance isn't unusual, such as the initial resistance to seatbelt laws or like youth smoking restrictions. And although social media companies haven't been fully compliant as expected, a March 2026 YouGov survey of parents of children 16 and under shows that it is already benefiting young people. So 61% observed 2 to 4 positive behavioural changes, and the reported improvements are 43% increase in in-person social interaction, 38% greater presence and engagement, and 38% improved parent-child relationships. So there are benefits coming from this already. It's just not perfect, and we wouldn't expect it to be perfect straight away as well. Also, can I just say, so last night I was looking through the App Store because as I mentioned before, like there's different apps that require different ages, and a couple of apps that Brianna was on was Omegle and Bigo Live. I would highly recommend having a look at these because like Bigo Live is a little tiny dinosaur cartoon which looks really cute. If you were a parent spot checking your child's phone, you would not look on that. But it is it's live streaming where you meet strangers, and I think it's basically like a dating site. It does say that it's for 18+, but then after looking at those, I was then recommended Monkey Live Video Chat, Twitch live streaming, and Chat Hub, all of which said that that's you need parental guidance, so it's not 18+. And also, like Snapchat is absolutely shocking. So Snapchat on the App Store says parental guidance. Yeah. There is no way that Snapchat is suitable for anybody under the age of 18. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to share a story from a parent that I know really, really well, which it's shocking for me. I'm very close friends with this person to hear something so close to home. So her child was contacted on Snapchat by somebody posing as another young person, and over time this person built and formed, so this child, by the way, is an 11-year-old girl. Over time this person built trust and formed what seemed like a friendship. It later became clear that this was an adult who went on to send explicit sexual videos and invited my child to a group chat with other children where sexual images of the children were shared. It was shocking and deeply distressing experience for our family, and it had a lasting impact. We reported everything to the police, but even they face huge challenges. Fake accounts, disappearing messages, and encrypted platforms make it extremely difficult to trace who is responsible. The police were investigating, but have now said that they can't trace the owner of the account, so other children are still being targeted, and this is still going on. So it's just shocking what is happening on a daily basis.
Thank you both for your answers. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Caroline Voda next.
Thank you. So I've got a question for Esther and Andy. So I'll go to Andy first. So last week, as you'll be aware, we had witnesses from Meta and TikTok here in front of the committee, and depressingly, although probably not surprisingly, they both rejected the idea that their platforms are addictive, although they did accept that there was a risk of overconsumption. How would you describe the relationship of children and young people with social media, and how would you respond to their claims that their social media platforms are not addictive? I'll start with Andy.
Look, the relationship right now is exploitative. The evidence obviously is mixed about population level harms, but I think in essence, we're probably looking in the wrong direction, because where we should be focusing is on intent. And it is very, very clear that platforms like Instagram are built on a business model that is engagement based, that is designed to keep eyeballs on screens for as long as possible. And in that respect, there is no differentiation between the experience for teens or for adults. So these are platforms that are inherently driven by personalized algorithmic recommendations. You just have to look at, the recent earnings reports from Meta, where you see time and again that they are boasting about improvements in time spent metrics as a result of their investment in AI. The idea that they are not building these platforms to maximize time spent and to try and ensure that these are addictive is frankly absurd. And, again, I think it speaks to the lack of incentives in place that platforms are continuing to be able to build platforms that are addictive by design, and then to have the chutzpah, frankly, to come in front of your committee and deny the glaringly obvious.
Thank you. Esther?
Exactly what Andy said, yeah. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Darren next.
Thank you. And my question's to Rani to begin with. The NSPCC has said that a ban on social media for under 16s is preferable to inaction, but you've stopped short of supporting a kind of statutory ban. Could you share what the key reasons are for that position, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So at the NSPCC, just for context, we are, of course, deeply concerned by the harms that children are experiencing online. In 2024-25, Childline delivered over 3,300 sessions with children and young people about the harms that they are experiencing online platforms. It is clear that the status quo is not working and urgent change is needed. What we are proposing at the NSPCC is something that we do think is more ambitious and, importantly, is more comprehensive than a specific social media ban. We want to see the introduction of risk-based minimum age limits so that we have new clear criteria and standards which set out what a service must comply with for it to be 13 plus, for it to be 16 plus, and actually what cannot be available and accessible for children at all online. This is similar to the approach that we take in gaming, for example, and with films. And in those sectors, I think we've recognised that the breadth of what children can see and experience in those spaces means that we have to think about a child's age and their stage of development in terms of what they can access. And we don't see any reason why the online world should work any differently. So we want these new standards to be introduced and robustly enforced. In terms of what would go in those, yes, we would absolutely need to look at harmful content as part of that. We also really welcome that the government's current consultation is looking at harmful functionalities. It's crucial that these are turned off for under 16s, things like live streaming, location sharing on social media, and as we've just said, switching off those addictive design features like autoplay and endless scrolling that keep children using them. Like I've said, we want this to go beyond social media. I think it would be a shame in letting children down if the only focus at the end of this consultation was on the harm on social media, because absolutely we need to address that, but we need to go further. We need to look at gaming, messaging apps, AI chatbots, and making sure that whatever clear standards we end up with in terms of what age-appropriate experiences should be, that we're applying those across the online world. I guess this approach can be summarised as we want to incentivise safety, but where services cannot meet these strict standards, they should not be able to offer their services to children. And if I may just to finish, I think something that's really important here when we're talking about the bans and what is going on across the world at the minute is it's really important, and we really welcome the focus on what age should children be able to go and online and to do certain things. But there is no yes or no, on or off answer here. All the approaches that are being taken across the world look a bit different. In Australia, they've got a broad definition of social media, but compliance is really focused on 10 services. In Denmark, they've taken an approach where they're setting it at 15, but saying that there is parental consent so that children can go online younger. In Indonesia, they've got a definition of high-risk platforms, so they look beyond social media, and they're focusing compliance on 8 companies. What I mean by that is that we have an opportunity in the UK to think about how we can be as bold and ambitious as possible for children, to look across the online world and all the harms that children are experiencing, and put something in place which reflects the risks that children experience now, but is also future-proof and can react as new risks and new services emerge over time.
Thank you. I mean, I think we have to recognise that some of this is a matter of language. I mean, take location sharing for example. A restriction on location sharing is a ban on location sharing for certain people. It's just that some people react to the word ban as being more sensationalist. So I think that's probably worth noting. But I mean, you've outlined a number of other measures, and I think most people who are arguing for one measure would accept that there is no single one which will solve the issue. So how are you, if indeed you are, confident that other measures than a statutory ban will be more effective than a ban?
So I don't see our position is in opposition to the discussions around a ban. And I think it goes back to my point around what other countries are doing is there is no option of a ban here. I think whatever the government chooses to do in terms of, and they made it clear last night, there will be restrictions at the age of 16 on children's experiences online. That is going to require some definition and in terms of where do we draw those lines. And I think what we're advocating for is that we should make those expectations really clear. We do think some things, like you say, should be banned for under 16s, like location sharing or live streaming. But also we do think there is space to have safer online services for children, and where we can incentivise that safety, we support that happening as well. So we're certainly not in opposition to strong restrictions coming in on what is harmful for children, and like you say, a lot of that has become semantics. What we're saying is there is no easy route out of this. This is complex, and the enforcement measures that come with it will have to be really robust. And what we want to see is the government really grasping the challenge with both hands and putting something that's comprehensive in place. I don't think this is an either or. I think it's about looking kind of across these measures and really pushing services to stop offering these harmful functionalities and services to children, but where they can be made safer, making sure that happens as well.
Just on the issue of effectiveness, a quick supplementary for Andy. The MRF put out your response to the first few months of the Australia ban, and your conclusion was that the Australian social media ban is not effective. Is that a hasty conclusion to come to after 92 days? And actually, isn't it a matter of perspective? I mean, your own figures say that in those 92 days, 39% of users are off completely, and by platform most of them have halved, and in one case it's reduced by 60%. Some might see that as actually quite an effective thing to achieve in 92 days. So do you have any thoughts on that, the kind of how strongly you've gone in with this is not effective, so we can only look at other things?
I should say we were also very clear that it is very early days, and there are a large number of systematic reviews that are underway, and in 12 to 18 months' time we'll have a much clearer sense of the harm to benefit ratio. We felt it was important to commission that data given the speed at which public policy discussions are taking place in the UK, but it clearly is only an interim snapshot. I think one thing that is important, though, is that if we do proceed down the route of an Australia-style ban, that we are ready to learn the lessons of what is working and what is not working. And, clearly many proponents of an outright Australia-style ban here in the UK have advocated for it as a decisive firebreak. And certainly what our data suggests is that it is not that, which is not to say that there cannot be advantages that can come from that. So look, this is really an attempt to ensure that we can have a nuanced, evidence-based discussion of what the implications of a ban will look like. And if we do go down that road, that we can ensure that appropriate lessons are learned. And to go back to this issue of malign compliance from the platforms, one of my concerns here in the UK would be that we have two regulators, Ofcom and the ICO, neither of which has been prepared or willing to set out outcome-based measures for what highly effective age assurance looks like. There is no figure that says highly effective age assurance means 95% of children or 90% of children, or wherever you draw that line, what that looks like. Now, if we go down the route of a ban, yes, I think that would be regrettable, but we have to then make sure that is watertight. And so the evidence from Australia, I think, shows us that there are, clear imperatives about how any ban might be brought forward.
Caroline.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up something with Andy, if that's okay. So if we've seen from the experience in Australia that an outright ban, there are positives and negatives, and it's clearly not working as comprehensively as the lawmakers might have hoped when they came up with it. So do you think a slightly more sort of nuanced approach, sort of along the lines of what Rani was saying, picking out different types of harm, different types of functionality and content, and banning those for particular age groups would be more effective? So saying, for example, if you have access to a chat room with strangers, then the platform has to be over 16, or location sharing or algorithmic content, whatever it might be. Do you think that would work better than just banning a platform per se?
That absolutely is the approach that we would like to see, and I agree absolutely with what Rani said. It's important because that then means that we can start to meaningfully incentivize the tech companies. If they want to offer products to younger children, they have to take that high risk functionality out. It also means that we have measures that can apply across the stack, so not just social media, but also gaming companies. And when I look at the risks, particularly the criminal risks around children being groomed into acts of suicide and self-harm, they are taking place on the likes of Roblox and on Discord rather than on social media. So that functionality-based approach is risk-based, it is harm-based, and it means that can apply not just across social media, but across other platforms, gaming services, AI chatbots, where lots of these risks are now also taking place.
And it incentivizes better behaviour by the tech companies, ultimately.
Yeah. Exactly that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Serena.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from some of the previous questions, let's take this opportunity to hone in and focus on the Australian government's social media platform ban for under 16s, and obviously give all the panel an opportunity to give their views. So we have heard, even in this session, some contradictive and inconsistent data that's coming out of Australia at this moment in time. We've heard that children are finding it relatively easy to circumvent the ban. We're hearing that 2/3 of young people are still accessing some form of social media, and yet we're hearing that over 60% of parents are reporting positive behavioural changes with their children. So my question to you is, has it been effective so far, and what lessons can the UK government learn? And I'll start with Esther.
I think that based on the statistics that I've presented to you around like the families and parents, I think that for me that shows success. I think that as a parent, the main thing for me with Brianna was the struggles in our relationship. Like, we were just constantly battling over her phone use and over social media. And I think that something that I hear from parents a lot is that they just want to be able to say to their children that no, you are not allowed on this. And I think that kind of works to an extent. So there's a lot of parents that are able to keep the children off social media until the age of 13 because they use that as an age. So I think that for me, I believe that it is successful, but we also need to wait a little bit longer to see the success from Australia. But I think that it doesn't mean that we have to delay, and I think that we could do it better. I think there's already things to learn from there, and I think that the UK could do we can do a better job because we've got the hindsight to learn from as well.
Part of the lessons that you mentioned earlier are around compliance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with social media platforms.
Yeah, and I'm hopefully I'm going to stick around to hear Snapchat after on the third panel, and I would also like to offer them my book as well, because they need to know and they need to take moral responsibility. I'm completely disappointed in social media companies, and I think it's about time that they also take responsibility.
Thank you. And Rani?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as you set out, it's a mixed picture from Australia at the minute. We've seen the eSafety Commissioner there shared that 4.7 million accounts have been removed from children since December, and that's not inconsequential. At the same time, we're also seeing the stats that show around 7 in 10 parents say that their children still have these social media accounts, and the Commissioner has set out significant concerns in terms of the steps services are taking to comply. I think what I would say we really need to learn from, though, is what we think about the scope in terms of the Australia social media ban. So they have technically defined the scope broadly in terms of how social media works, but really compliance is coming down to looking at 10 key platforms, and there is very little to no focus on what other services are doing under that system. Now, I have a couple of key concerns with that. One is that we know that the harms that children face expand much beyond those 10 services. Even if you do get really effective restrictions on those, it's not about children moving to dark or unregulated spaces. It's about them using the other platforms that they're using day in, day out. So I want to, platforms like Roblox, Discord, those that are coming out of scope. So that's why a key part of our recommendation is that this has to go beyond just look on social media and looks at the risk that services are posing and uses risk as the basis for whether children should access or not. I also think it poses a challenge in terms of future-proofing, because if those 10 platforms start to be used less, as hopefully should be the intention in Australia, as other versions emerge and pop up, again, is the legislation going to be adaptive enough to tackle those harms? So that's why we think this focus on the risk that services pose and setting that out as a framework with clear age limits could be much more robust now in terms of capturing the range of harms, but also going much more into the future. And then the last point, again, is to pick up this issue of enforcement. I won't go into it, but just to really reiterate the points that I think all of the solutions that we're looking at here will require a better understanding of who children are online, where are they, and what are they doing. Services have failed completely to do that effectively at the minute, and we need much stricter legal powers to force them to do that properly, and the use of not only fines but senior manager liability and the quick use of business disruption measures where services are simply ignoring their duties to children.
Thank you. Andy, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Two very quick points around enforcement. Look, I think we have to be realistic about Ofcom's approach so far. It has taken them 13 months and an investigation still hasn't concluded to take action against a pro-suicide forum that is directly linked to at least 164 UK deaths. So there are big questions about how we see the step change in enforcement that is required, so we don't end up in a situation where we have a ban, but then we see a similar set of impacts that we're seeing in Australia, where the picture is messy, and then we see it take an eternity for Ofcom to take action in terms of enforcement. I would also just point to an example from South Korea, because back in 2011, the South Korean government banned online gaming between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. That was in response to concerns about excess use and addiction, and that impacting on pupils turning up to school, being tired and affecting educational performance. Now, in the first few months of that curfew coming into force, we saw immediate benefits. We saw time spent online dropping and some positive indicators. But by year 4, what we then saw was actually children were now spending more time online and gaming than they were beforehand. Internet addiction had decreased by just 0.7 percentage points, and the average child had benefited an extra 90 seconds of sleep. So I think we need to be very clear that if we go ahead with a ban, we need to be open-minded about its limitations. We cannot conclude that this is a magic bullet, and we need to recognise that the impacts may improve over time. We may see benefits over time, but we may also see those benefits start to ebb away, as we've seen with South Korea. So, we need to monitor this, and I think it's why, just assuming that a ban can achieve everything would be misplaced.
Thank you very much. We are under quite heavy time pressure this morning. It's quite unusual for us to have 3 panels, so I'm going to need to ask our witnesses to be as concise as you possibly can be in answering our questions, and the same to members of the committee in questioning as well. And we'll go to Jess for our next question.
Thank you. In July last year, new age verification requirements were introduced in order to protect under 18s from seeing harmful content online, including hate speech, pornography and violence. How effective have these measures been in reducing children's exposure to harmful content, at first focusing on social media platforms and then on other platforms that children might use? And I'll go to Andy first.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think so. We can see there's highly effective age assurance at 18, and then age assurance to determine the age of children beneath that age. We can see that there clearly have been real gains around age verification at 18, and that is very welcome. I think our concern would be that then we are not seeing age assurance being deployed effectively when it comes to identifying children who are beneath 18 in order to offer them a suitable and age-appropriate experience, and then to ensure that we're seeing compliance with the codes of practice. And this comes back to the fact that we have regulators, both Ofcom and the ICO, that are very, very reluctant to put a number on it. And in the absence of clear outcome-based measures, wherever you draw that line, but a line needs to be drawn, then we don't have a focus, and it means that we're seeing a very messy picture.
Okay, Rani.
So Ofcom have reported from the looking at pornography sites that the use of age verification, when they looked across the major sites, did lead to a drop in users accessing those sites, and it's very fair to assume that some of those users will have been children. So I think, as Andy says, with those hard measures we are seeing improvements, and we also know that children are reporting content being blocked and blurred and so on social media. I do think it's not going far enough in terms of the efficacy though, and I think something this really links back to is how services themselves are assessing the risks on their platforms. Ofcom have been transparent around the fact that services are not taking their own risk levels seriously enough, and so as a result the measures, the Online Safety Act allows for very strong mitigations to be put in place, but at the minute that's not happening, and it's coming back to the point that services aren't accurately assessing the risks on their services. So we have seen improvements where age verification is being used, we have seen some of these really significant changes happening, but it does come back to the issue of enforcement and how companies assess their own risks so we can get the right mitigations in place.
And obviously we've heard a fair bit about VPNs and other workarounds being used by children to bypass age verification requirements. To what extent do you think that this is happening at scale, and how should we approach the issue of VPN use?
Well, again, if we look back to this date in July when these restrictions were brought in last year, there was a lot of discussion about VPNs. There was also a huge use of these age checks. On the day that the restrictions came in, it was estimated that well over 5 million age checks took place. And data that the likes of Internet Matters and others have collected since suggests that VPN use has remained consistent by children in this time, and that there hasn't been a serious spike. I think it's really important that data protection and education and support for children continues to monitor and look at this, but I would say the general evidence suggests there's not been a huge use. Where services don't know the location of their users and where they're coming from, I think they should take the strongest protections possible until they have a better idea of who their users are, and I think Ofcom providing clearer guidance around companies needing to do that would be welcome, but I don't think the evidence is to suggest that people are bypassing these measures en masse.
And did you have anything to add to that?
I would agree with that, and I mean I would just add, in Australia we're not seeing a wide uptick of VPNs, largely because of the fact that accounts aren't being taken down.
Thank you. Yours is one. To Rani, the NSPCC has, as you said earlier, proposed this risk-based approach to children's access to social media. I think you have explained how some of that will work in practice, but quite interested in understanding the sort of effective enforcement by platforms and regulators a little bit more, because we've also heard quite a bit of criticism of Ofcom here, and of course the current Online Safety Act is meant to be a risk-based system, but the business disruption measures, which Ofcom does have access to, particularly where companies are based overseas, it seems that they are not able to effectively use those business disruption measures in order to enforce the law, I guess, is the point. So what more should be given, I guess, to regulators in order that they can enforce even what we currently have in our current law, let alone future regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do have a really welcome opportunity to kind of strengthen the legislation here. I think something that has been a challenge with the Online Safety Act is this safe harbour provision, which says that if services set out mitigations to address the risks that they found, or Ofcom have said that they've done enough, and also that they can set out alternative ways of keeping children safe, and that they can take a different approach to what Ofcom says. I think we need to remove the wiggle room and the leeway here. I think we have to have clear, watertight standards that set out pretty much in black and white what has to happen, and there's no room for alternatives and taking a different approach. This is the way that it has to be done. On the way that that's then enforced, I think, I agree, the challenge is that Ofcom does have a huge amount of powers at the minute. I would be interested to see the government use this opportunity, not just to strengthen the rules, but also to strengthen the Ofcom's mandate and the expectation that they act rapidly and use these. I think the problem at the minute is we're working through fines and then lots and lots of processes before we get to the point where we're considering using business disruption. Actually, I think we should be looking in a position to say, if a service is not meeting these clear safety duties for children, that should be an immediate lever that Ofcom can pull. I know there's been lots of discussion in the sector around how you could do that so that businesses are disrupted while investigations happen, so we're not waiting for the outcome of lengthy investigations before those measures kicked in. So I would like to see kind of clarity and a push from government to use that as well.
Thank you. We'll go to Chris.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all of you for coming to participate in today's discussion. I have to say particularly Esther, because this is a really emotional topic that's hugely important to all of us. Look, I'm not going to ask Andy this question because I think he's kind of answered it, but just to Esther and Rani really in turn. Do you think that Ofcom and the Information Commission's Office have the right approach to regulating age assurance? I'll go to Esther first.
Oh, sorry, I don't know enough about that
right,
to answer,
okay.
really sorry.
I can come in. We support the approach that the regulators are taking in terms of not mandating one specific way is the only way to do this. I think with something like age assurance, there has to be a range of options, particularly as we're looking at children using these services more, because we know children might not have the hard forms of ID verification that adults are much more likely to have. So we support the idea that it's tech neutral. What needs to be really clear is having that these services meet Ofcom's principles so that they're accurate, robust, reliable, and that they're clearly in compliance with ICO and data protection. I don't think that's been reported on clearly enough, and I think that has impacted public trust. So I'd like to see a lot better public communication around how these mechanisms are complying. But yeah, as we look to have greater age assurance and children using these systems more, I think we have to think about how these systems work flexibly so that they are accessible and safe for all children to use.
Thank you. My next question is about the government's announcement this week, or last week, sorry, about existing guidance on restricting mobile phones and putting this on the statutory foot. And I have to say, when I speak to schools in my constituent of Harlow, there's a mixed response to whether it needs to be statutory or not. Some schools say they do it very well anyway. Other schools say it's all well and good making it statutory, but how is it going to be enforced? So I just wanted to ask you, what difference do you think putting it on a statutory footing will make, but also potentially what additional support schools and educational establishments will need to ensure that's actually meaningful on the ground? And I'll go to Esther.
Thank you. So yeah, I welcome the statutory ban coming into law. I do, from speaking to teachers and from working with the NSUWT, who were speaking on behalf of 300,000 members, I would like to see the out-of-sight policy removed from the guidance, and also funding for head teachers to implement. We know that the out-of-sight policy doesn't work. I know from a personal perspective that it doesn't work because of how Brianna was in school, and I hear from teachers all of the time. I've got some quotes. Sorry, I put my phone away because I didn't realise we were going to go into this. But just to say, the NSUWT, from their Big Question survey, found that members, when asked which pupil behaviour problems cause the most concern on a day-to-day basis, more than a third of members cited distraction of mobile phones in the classroom. And one quote said that pupils believe it's their right to access mobile phones throughout the day, interrupting learning, causing confrontations, damaging their ability to concentrate due to the growing addiction to phone use. And this is what I'm hearing when I go to teachers' conferences, that there's so many horrific stories, and I just feel that teachers should not be dealing with this in the classroom. They're there to teach. And just to say as well that I think that sometimes head teachers aren't in the classroom, they're not kind of in the front line, so they don't see the issues that mobile phones are causing. But yeah, I really do welcome the statutory ban.
So I declare I used to be a teacher, so I absolutely recognise what you're talking about. I suppose I would just say my response to that would be, it's okay, put it on a statutory basis, but would you agree that there still needs to be that support? You know, what support can you said about funding, for example, which is I'm looking at Daniel over your head as I said this, but that's obviously important. But what else do you think?
We are moving on to be able to question schools about. We are moving on to school representatives in just a second, and who would perhaps be better able to answer that question. But if you want to come in really briefly, we are getting towards the end now of this
just
session.
The two things really: the out of sight policy to be removed, the guidance to be more clear. So and I think the other points on the guidance are okay, but it's just the out of sight policy to be removed and funding for schools to implement it.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. We're hugely grateful to all three of you for coming to give your evidence to us this morning. I think one of the takeaways from this session is there's actually kind of more agreement perhaps between the three of you and your organisations than is perhaps evident from the public debate on this topic, and that it's been very helpful for us to be able to drill into that this morning. So thank you very much indeed. We're going to move to our second panel now because we are very for time. What I'd say, I always say this to witnesses, if there's anything that you didn't feel you were able to get across with the time that we had this morning, please do write to the committee after this session, and we'd be very glad to hear from you. Thank you very much. Order.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the second panel of our session this morning on screen time and social media. Glad to welcome three representatives from unions representing members of the teaching profession to give your evidence to us. Before I ask you to introduce yourselves to us, I think we might have members of the committee who would like to make at least one declaration of interest. Peter?
Chair, I'd like to declare that I'm the chair of the APPG for Schools Learning and Assessment, for which the NEU is the secretariat.
Great, thank you very much. Anybody else? Chris?
Chair, I'm an officer on the same APPG.
Declare that I was a paid member of ASCL, NEU and NASUWT in my former life as a teacher and deputy head teacher.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Let's invite members, invite our witnesses to introduce yourselves to us, if that's okay, starting with Darren Northcott.
Good morning, my name's Darren Northcott. I'm the National Official for Education at the NASUWT.
Good morning, I'm Tom Middlehurst, the Deputy Director of Policy at the Association of School and College Leaders, ASCL.
Thank you.
And I'm Daniel Kebede, the General Secretary of the National Education Union.
Great, and I'm going to go to Caroline Bowden for our first question.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to talk to you about the mobile phones in schools. We know that most schools already have some kind of policy prohibiting phone use during the school day. Could you tell us how you think the current approach is working in schools at the moment? And I'll start with you, Darren.
I think currently our feedback is that it's variable. So in some schools it seems to be working well, and in others it doesn't. And this, I think, in part comes onto the issue around whether the guidance is statutory or non-statutory. And I think the fact the guidance is non-statutory sometimes causes problems in those schools that would like to enforce perhaps more restrictions on mobile phones and connected devices, but don't feel confident enough because the statutory underpinning isn't there. So I think in terms of the experience, it varies. I think our judgment is that statutory guidance, and we just saw the announcement from the government, that statutory guidance would provide further support to schools in making sure that they have appropriate restrictions on access to mobile phones and other devices during the school day. But I think to answer your core question, it's variable. In some schools they have good practice, but in others I think it's less effective.
Thank you. And Tom?
Yeah, no, I'd agree completely with what Darren said. The effectiveness of those policies is variable because of that ambiguity around the status of that guidance, and I don't think that's sometimes helped by the government. So, recently in January, the Secretary of State wrote to all head teachers saying that she wanted all schools to have due regard of that non-statutory guidance. Now that letter went to head teachers at sort of 6 o'clock in the morning. Later that afternoon, the DfE were putting on webinars about the new app for Year 11s to download their results in the summer, which you can only do if you scan a QR code that your teacher has access to, that you must have your mobile phone out in the school at some point in the school day to be able to access. So there's a lack of alignment there between different in the same department, but between the government, and I think that in itself creates confusion.
Absolutely, yeah. Daniel?
Well, I mean, Tom makes a really important point, actually. So, starting point is schools have had to deal with mobile phone use for decades, and many have really good, coherent and appropriate policies in place. But what we are seeing is obviously technology play a much greater role in education. So many members are talking to us about this need for flexibility, so that actually young people can use their phones at certain points. But what really underpins that is actually budgets are incredibly tight in schools, and there is a deficit of appropriate technology for young people to access. So their own personal mobile phone is something that schools are wanting to use from time to time for reasons as Tom pointed out.
Okay, thank you. So going back to what you were saying, Darren, about the guidance becoming statutory. So quite a lot of schools have a not seen, not heard policy. So put it in your bag, turn it off, pretend it's not there, don't get distracted by it. Don't look at it in the break, don't look at it at lunchtime, just carry it around all day in your bag. Now, I personally, if somebody told me to do that with my phone all day, I would find that a bit of a challenge not to look at it. So, I don't think that's the most effective way to do this. But a head teacher in my patch said to me yesterday that the fact that it has now become statutory would make no difference at all. He could still carry on doing the put it in your bag, not seen, not heard, because actually that was still within the letter of the law, and so nothing needed to change. So do you think that the government have gone far enough, or do you think they should actually have specified that phones should be taken off, phones should be handed in at the beginning of the school day and given back at the end of the school day, rather than being carried around in bags?
I think that's exactly right. So making the guidance non-statutory, changing the guidance from a non-statutory guidance to statutory guidance is a step in the right direction, but maybe it's worth leaving the bunting in the loft for now, because I think there are other steps that would need to be taken. So that guidance, that non-statutory guidance, which will be made statutory, I think one of the issues with that is that wasn't developed in consultation with certainly trade unions or with the workforce more generally. So it doesn't necessarily reflect the reality that the head teacher in your constituency was talking about. So statutory guidance is important because it provides that kind of consistent underpinning, but it's what that statutory guidance says and doesn't say, which I think is the key next step.
Anybody have anything to add to that?
I think our members would welcome a degree of flexibility in how that statutory guidance is implemented. Yeah. And I think we would say where not seen, not heard policy is already working and has been working for a long time, it would seem foolish to have to change that policy and potentially to invest quite a lot of money in pouches or whatever if that is working. And we might come on later to the role of Ofsted in all of this, but there is a process by which Ofsted can check whether a policy is effective or not. Now of course if it transpires that policy isn't working and pupils are going in and checking social media whilst they're allowed at break time and lunchtime in the toilets, that's obviously a problem. But if it is effective, then actually there doesn't need to be that investment to go further than that. And that is a role, I think, for the inspectorate.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, anything to add?
No, nothing to add.
No, I agree with your point, though, about them being expected to use tech and then not have tech. It is quite confusing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Serena.
Thank you. I believe that all three teaching unions have have welcomed the statutory guidance, but also made the point that more funding is needed to support schools to implement measures. So what funding do you believe schools would actually need? What would this cost? And I'm very happy to start with Daniel.
So we need to look at funding in the round. There's been a complete erosion of school funding over many years that needs to be corrected and reversed. But in terms of, for example, a pouches system is incredibly costly for a school. You're looking at about £20 per unit. If you've got 1,000 children in your school, that's a £20,000 outlay to get going. So, if we're going to do this seriously, there does need to be the most appropriate funding associated with it as well.
Yeah, I'd echo Daniel's points. Depending on exactly what that statutory guidance looks like and the extent to which the government are clear whether not seen, not heard policy meets that new statutory requirement or not, for a lot of schools that will require investment with cash that they just don't have, as Daniel alluded to, and I agree, our members are telling us anywhere between 20 and 40,000 to implement that type of policy, which schools don't have at the moment.
Thank you. Darren, anything you wish to add on that point?
I mean, I think our preferred approach, or the approach that we think is the most encouraging, is the lockable pouches approach. Yes. But as Daniel says, that isn't necessarily per unit a huge amount of investment, but it's investment that schools would find it difficult to meet from their own budget. So some amount of kind of national public investment in that, I think, would be very helpful, necessary perhaps to get the best possible practice in place. But it's not something I think we can expect schools to meet universally from their own budgets.
Okay, and with Ofsted now examining mobile phone policies and how effective that they are, especially when judging behaviour during inspections, do you welcome that development? And I will start with Tom, seeing that you mentioned Ofsted earlier.
Yeah, well, actually, I think we need to disassociate or distinguish between Ofsted and what they're doing at the moment while that guidance is non-statutory and what might happen in September when that guidance does become statutory. I think we have a real issue with Ofsted and the word the government used was reinforcing non-statutory expectations, because that leads to the sort of ambiguity that Darren is talking about. Is it statutory or not? Well, if Ofsted are going to report on it, even if it's not, it feels very much like it is to school and college leaders. When that guidance becomes statutory, I think it's absolutely right that we use the inspectorate to check that that statutory legislation is being followed through at a school level. So I think we should distinguish between those two things. In terms of how Ofsted are suggesting going about looking at that, it seems proportionate, it seems sensible. That's notwithstanding the huge concerns we have about the current framework and the amount of judgments that Ofsted are having to make in a very short amount of time. But I think it is worth distinguishing between those two different situations that schools will find themselves in, depending when this ban comes in.
And Darren?
I mean, I think inspection of provisions such as restrictions on access to mobile phones and connected devices in principle is reasonable. It would be hard to argue with, but I think the practicality, I think Tom's touched on some of those points, are important to acknowledge. So, for example, if we're enforcing through what is a very punitive and high-stakes accountability regime compliance with guidance, then it's incumbent on the government as a minimum to make sure that schools are getting the support that they need in order to comply with those expectations. And I think our members wouldn't be entirely confident that that would be the case in practice.
Daniel?
So I certainly think that the inspectorate has enough sticks to beat schools and teachers with at the moment, if I'm being brutally honest. The issue around behaviour and social media in schools is a really important one, though, and I don't want us to be distracted from what real action needs to be taken. 95% of our members are saying that social media is leading to a real increase in behavioural issues in school. You talk to any teacher at the moment, social media is a real issue. I mean, I've witnessed, young people threatening to stab each other on Snapchat. It's a really difficult climate out there at the moment, and I think what we really do need to focus on is statutory bans, real legislation on social media for young people. Schools are largely doing a very good job in incredibly difficult circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will go to Mark next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So what would each of you assess is the impact of screen time on how students interact with each other in all settings, but also how they interact with your staff? Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, well, I've touched on it. It's an incredibly difficult climate out there at the moment to be a teacher, but also to be a young person. Young people at the moment are spending around 35 hours a week on social media, and the content that they are viewing is, so it's just like a job, online. The content that they are viewing is extreme, it's misogynistic, it's racist, it's homophobic. We have done an experiment through our campaign Big Tech Little Victims. Do get a copy of it, an algorithm experiment. Within 3 minutes, young people are witnessing of scrolling, they're witnessing extreme content. They're getting exposed to extreme content, one piece of extreme content every minute they are scrolling. We are absolutely insane to think that does not shape their interactions with each other and with teachers. Female teachers in particular are experiencing a huge increase in misogyny, misogynistic language. What young people, particularly boys, are experiencing online is completely distorting their views of women, sex and relationships. And, we should be all alarmed.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd echo exactly what Daniel said. And I think the key point is that both with the social media ban, whatever that looks like, and with the ban on mobile phones in school during the day, young people are still going to access this content at some point in their lives. So schools are also having to navigate how they prepare young people when they do see that content, how they navigate that, how they respond to it, how they use kind of digital literacy to make sense of what is harmful content, where extreme views might be expressed. And so as well as the day-to-day consequences of accessing that, schools are thinking about how they can prepare young people in the future to meet those challenges. And so it's not just a case of kind of behaviour and attitudes, it's also about actually the skills of understanding that content and making sense of it.
Understood. And Darren?
I think Daniel and Tom's points are very well made. I think one point that our members raise as well is this idea about the amount of screen time that young people are having. So there's screen time outside of school, but there's increasingly screen time in school as well. And to what extent is school, or can school be, to some extent, a haven from just endless screen time, whatever the nature of the content, just being in front of a screen rather than doing things, if you like, offline in the real world. That's something that I think is an important debate to have, particularly around what our curriculum looks like and what teaching and learning looks like in schools. I know there's a live debate about the policy I think that's been adopted in Sweden in respect of the changes that they've made to their curriculum. Whether that's right or wrong, I think it's too early to say. But I think that is an important part of the debate. How much time do children spend during a day not looking at a screen, doing something worthwhile that isn't screen-based?
I was going to come to this question later on, but I'll ask it now because it follows on beautifully from that. So as a former teacher, and I declare that I was a member of Daniel and Darren's unions, as a former maths teacher, I found some of the homework platforms incredibly useful. We've been talking about harmful algorithms this morning. Well, I can tell you some useful algorithms that identified what students weren't good at, gave them content to improve on that, and just kept giving it to them week after week until they got better. But of course, that meant that they were spending time on screens at home. So how do we reconcile then the fact that the statutory ban is coming in to stop phones being in schools with the fact that some of these platforms are genuinely helpful to our students? How do we reconcile that?
I think that's a really good point. I think it's difficult. I don't think there's a straightforward answer to it, because there are, of course, online platforms that are incredibly useful for young people, particularly educationally. I think part of the answer is thinking about a child's day, if you like. What is a child spending their time doing during the whole course of the day? And I think part of the solution is looking at school, making sure there are sufficient experiences in schools that aren't in front of screens. So by all means use screens, but use them in a proportionate way so that there is time for children to engage in activity, to engage in learning that isn't on the screen. It's structured and formatted in a different way. So that's not to discount the importance of those platforms. They are important, but it's also to make sure we have a balance between that kind of learning and other forms of non-screen based learning.
Thank you. Tom or Daniel, a point to make on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the debate around this has been about the quantity of screen time, and actually little is focused on the quality of screen time. What is that quality experience that young people are getting? And I think we could do more to understand what that looks like. And it's why I think Rani's point in the previous panel is so important, that taking a risk-based approach to some of these platforms not only future-proofs what might happen later with different tools, but it does allow for those quality tools, those quality apps that do help young people learn, that do foster a sense of belonging for some people. They can help young people flourish in a proportionate way.
Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously the use of online platforms for learning, they must align with the reality of the classroom. Now, schools have different policies on how to use them, and lots of that will depend on their ability financially to be able to purchase devices. But, some devices such as Google Classroom, I think it is, there's an ability to use a device that, allows them to access that portal whilst excluding everything else. Yeah. So we need to take that sort of approach, really.
And then just finally, very briefly from me, have your members identified any specific social media platforms that are causing more harm than others?
I think they identify a range, and I think the names I would share would probably be the names you would anticipate. I don't think there's one that's seen as being particularly more damaging than other. We heard earlier about Snapchat. You do hear quite a lot about Snapchat, I have to say, but I wouldn't want to say that there is a significant emphasis on Snapchat compared with the other social media platforms that are generally used.
That's fine, we've got them next, so we'll ask them the question.
But also largely ones that allow that sort of group chat. I mean, you can, when we were at school, we could have a falling out with somebody in the day, we could go home and things would cool off in the evening. Now, if there's, inter-pupil disagreements or whatever, or bullying or whatever, it's 24/7 for them because of the nature of these Snapchat group chats.
And actually, we haven't talked a lot about parents in this at all, but actually parent groups on sort of, actually, I was going to say sort of, it's not Snapchat, it's Facebook actually, often for parents, and WhatsApp groups. They are particularly problematic and quite insidious sometimes for school and college leaders.
Thank you all for your answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just fill in a little bit more on what a kind of good and appropriate approach would look like to the availability of technology within schools? So I think one of the things that you've been saying is pupils' use of their own personal devices, for all of the reasons that we know about the accessibility of social media platforms on those devices, it is problematic in schools, and you support the ban that the government is introducing on those uses, but that there are platforms that are increasingly deployed within schools, including some of those platforms being recommended from the government itself as well. We've had, I think, for a long time, kind of not a particularly adequate articulation of what a kind of appropriate approach to IT looks, and a fit-for-purpose approach to IT looks like in schools. We know that schools have often lagged behind where the rest of the population is at, where workplaces are at in relation to access to technology. From your members and from the work that you undertake as trade unions, what does good look like in relation to schools' access to technology, which is ring-fenced and closed and appropriate for the kinds of platforms that can help with their education within the school day?
There's a lot in that question, but I think you're alighting upon, I think, an important point. I think one issue around technology, maybe this goes back to the point about the use of apps and other platforms in learning, is that sometimes the experience is technology-led rather than learning-led. So technology gets adopted because it's technology and because it's new and because it has different types of functionality. Whereas I think teachers and leaders would probably advocate an approach that was around learning first. So what learning objectives do we want the children and young people to achieve? And then how can technology be brought in to help them achieve those aims and objectives? That, I think, is a better way of thinking about it. You don't always see it. Sometimes schools can be put under a lot of pressure to adopt technology before they've necessarily had the time, and sometimes it is about time, and schools are under a lot of pressure, but the time to think about, well, what technology is going to be useful to help our pupils achieve and make progress with their learning. So that would be one, I think, aspect of a good policy.
And I mean, to add to that, I think, the government at the moment are drafting a new national curriculum that, for the first time in a long time, all state-funded schools will have to follow from September 2028. And within that, explicitly, is teaching about digital literacy. And again, I think once we establish as a country, what all young people will learn about digital literacy, then we can follow on with what are the best tools to help them learn that. Exactly as Darren was saying. So again, the committee might want to look at the implementation of that curriculum when we have that published Easter next year.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. We will go. So, did you want to come in, Manuela? No. Okay. In which case, we'll go to Chris.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a lot about some of the quite extreme things that young people see online, the harmful content and misogyny, which is really, really disturbing. I visited a school in my constituency a couple of weeks ago, and one of the girls raised her concern about disinformation online, and that can sometimes be very obvious, the things we spoke about, obvious to us, but sometimes it can be quite subtle as well. And you've touched, Tom, about digital and online literacy education. I declare an interest. I'm also a maths teacher, or was a former maths teacher, and I worry about giving teachers more to do, putting more on their plate and not taking anything off. But do you think there's more that schools need to do in terms of digital and online literacy education? And I think about dealing with that understanding of bias and understanding of that disinformation, even if it's sometimes quite subtle. And also, do you think teachers are currently equipped with the right knowledge and training? And equally, I would say, when it comes to, for example, political disinformation, the confidence to talk to young people about that. Because I think from my time in school, I was very careful to be politically neutral for obvious reasons. But that in itself is a skill that you need to have as an educator. So I'll go to Darren first, and I'll go on.
Again, there's an awful lot, I think, in that issue. I think it's important. There are certainly issues around political impartiality, so that's a statutory duty on schools to make sure that everyone working within that school is politically impartial. I think most people would think that is right, that schools should be political impartial spaces. But then within that context, you've got to think about how you address those really important points around disinformation. I think you're right about children and young people being exposed to that information and being concerned about it. I think our concerns, though, would reach beyond the child and young person population to the population as a whole in terms of disinformation and its impact on our society. Education has a role to play, and I'm not sure that teachers would report that the training and support that they get is sufficient to enable them to play their part in addressing those issues. However, I think one consistent message that you would get from teachers and leaders is that schools can't solve on their own all the problems of society. They're not isolated from it. They reflect the societies within which they're located. So as part of a strategy to address the pernicious impact of misinformation online, I think schools have a role to play. Maybe they're not supported as much as they should be to play that role, but it's important to look at, well, what other policy levers do we have to address what is a really profound issue?
Thank you.
So in terms of digital literacy, and particularly actually our members' confidence to educate around disinformation in particular. We surveyed our members on this issue. About 1 in 10 primary teachers in particular, they feel that they lack the confidence to teach about that effectively. So there does need to be adequate training provided and funding associated.
Was that 1 in 10 feel confident or don't feel confident?
Don't feel confident. Do not feel confident in delivering lessons about how to discern misinformation online. So we do have to consider that and bring about appropriate investment and training.
And, I mean, on that point around sort of disinformation, I mean, two things occur to me. One is, for the first time, citizenship is being put into the primary national curriculum. We really welcome that. We think that's good. But in terms of the support that schools will need for that, I don't think that's been recognised yet. But, so the national curriculum will be the first step in setting out what we want young people to learn. There's a huge amount to do in terms of the implementation of that. Yeah. I mean, the other point around disinformation is I'm looking forward to reading the inquiry that the committee that Mr. Swallow chairs is doing on schools preparing young people for votes at 16, which I think will touch on some of this in a really useful way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Darren next.
Thank you. The government's now published some guidance on screen time for children under the age of 5. So just wanted to get a sense of how necessary you think that is and what impact it'll have on children, particularly thinking about when they come to start school. Maybe start with Darren.
I think it's helpful. I think you'd rather have it than not have it. So I think it's a step in the right direction. At the very least, if it's encouraging families to talk about screen time within the home, how much time are very young children spending in front of screens, do we have that balance right? I think that's helpful. I think it would be really interesting to see what the impact of that is and whether the government is planning to monitor and perhaps research what the impact of that is on families. But I think my sense would be that this isn't just an issue for the very youngest children, it's an issue, as I think we were touching on earlier, for older children as well. So developing that guidance in a way that means it's applicable to maybe older children is something that should be thought about. I think the issue is, particularly when children are reaching school age, that it's helpful for the government. It helps make better policy if you engage with teachers and leaders in terms of what that guidance should look like. I think it would be a shame to develop guidance for school-age children on screen time outside of school without gaining the expertise and the knowledge and understanding of teachers and leaders in what that guidance should look like. So yes, it's a good step, and there may be other steps that can be taken, but maybe there are other things that can be done as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we really welcome that guidance. We would like to see it used in a really practical way, being given to all parents as part of the bounty pack they get given when they become new parents. We think that the fact that Sure Start centres, over the last sort of 20 years were decimated was a real shame. With the government's commitment to introduce new Best Start centres in life, I think that's really positive, and actually not just producing this guidance, but engaging parents with that guidance, show them how they can use it. If they already have children, show them how they can implement it retrospectively, which we know is a big problem, because if a child is used to screen time, taking that away from them is harder than starting from scratch. We think that's all really positive.
Yeah, of course, it's very useful. Needs expanding. Your average 12-year-old is spending 21 hours a week on a phone, and according to the OECD, 70% of 10-year-olds already has a smartphone. We do a state of education survey actually, and we surveyed thousands of teachers, and particularly in early years, actually what's coming back is this concern for the under 5s around their parents' smartphone and online time. That because of that, they're having less these under 5s are having less interaction, less time outside, and more exposure to inappropriate content, particularly if there's an influence of older siblings in the room. So
what's the ideal role for schools in all of that? Because you're mentioning the kind of contextual factors of parental use and early intervention and education, from Start through Best Start, family hubs and so on. What do you see as the kind of optimum role that schools can play in that jigsaw of support?
Well, I mean, that's a really important question. We spent a lot of time previously just talking about technology in schools, and I think it was Darren who might have made the point about schools being a haven from technology and screen time. I think that's something that we should pursue. In fact, I worry about a direction of travel, in essence, where you have state-funded schools that are quite technology heavy, but those who go to the fee-paying schools in environments that are quite technology-like, but they have lots of arts, creativity. So I think what's emerging is quite a class-based issue, to be honest.
I think also schools are very much the interface between families and government policy. So schools inevitably have a role in sharing that information and sharing that guidance and making sense of it. The key point that we would need to make is if government wants schools to play that role, they've got to fund them to do that. We talked a bit about Ofsted earlier, and as Darren said, and Daniel said as well, already there are so many sticks with which Ofsted can beat school and college leaders. We don't want this to become yet another one, and for it to become an expectation that schools do play this function in society and then hold schools accountable for that without adequately funding schools to perform that.
I think if schools are developing their approaches to helping children apply more critical thinking to screen time and what they see online, schools also spend a lot of time engaging with parents around what children are learning in schools. And I think that might be, as I think Tom was saying, a helpful way in which parents can learn what children themselves are learning in schools. And I think that maybe could help prompt the kind of conversations within families about, well, how much screen time are we accessing? What's the quality of that screen time? Do we need to think about as a family how much time we're spending in front of screens? It could be a helpful contributor to those useful conversations that families might have.
Just finally for me, but briefly, Darren, you mentioned that there's talk of guidance for older children, for fives. What would be top of your list for what should be included in that guidance for that phase of life, if you like?
I think one of the key messages that I think schools, when it goes back to what we were just discussing, what schools would want to develop on the part of pupils is that kind of critical thinking around what am I seeing? Can I believe it? How do I test it? How do I explore alternatives to the view that's being presented to me online? I think those basic principles of what good digital literacy looks like should certainly inform schools' approaches, but I think there are certainly very transferable principles from that school context to guidance that might be provided for parents and families.
And Madonna, anything different that you would put top of the list?
Well, I think that focus not just on the quantity, which is very much in the guidance for younger children, but the quality of the guidance, the screen time as well.
Yeah. Nothing to add.
Thank you very much.
Can I just ask about the relationship that screens and mobile phones play in your members' relationship with parents at the moment? So we can talk about guidance and we can talk about statutory ban and a whole range of policy changes that the government is introducing, but ultimately it's your members who are on the ground negotiating with children, negotiating with parents about what is in the best interest of children. I just wondered if there's anything that you can tell us about your members' experience of that, and is there friction? Is everybody pulling in the same direction in the interest of the child? Is there an adequate understanding of what's in the interest of the child that is shared between professionals and parents, or are there issues that you can foresee as your members seek to navigate the implementation of this new guidance?
Part of the discussion that schools have with parents around access, let's say access to mobile phones and other connected devices on site, is around why such restrictions are being put in place. And I think some of the work we were just talking about in terms of engagement with families, encouraging conversations about mobile phone use and social media access within families is part of helping families engage with this maybe in a more constructive way than you sometimes see. I don't want to overstate that, but it does sometimes happen. But I think that statutory guidance is really important in supporting those conversations, because schools are able to say to a parent who maybe is pushing back against restrictions being placed on access to mobile phones and connected devices on site, a school would be able to say to that parent, but this is a national expectation. There is no school in England you can go to that will permit what you're asking us to permit. That's very helpful for schools, and it's certainly something that some schools have raised with us as a barrier to encouraging parents to support what the school is doing rather than challenging it.
And I think further to Darren's point, I mean that's the guidance around mobile phones in schools, but because there is no guidance on screen time for older children, as Darren was talking about, lots of schools will write their own guidance for parents on that. They'll talk about sort of being secondary ready, being school ready, not having mobile phones in the bedroom at night. But that's them writing that, drawing on research, drawing on evidence. But again, if they could point to guidance coming from the government to say, look, this is not just us saying that, this is everyone, and we can help you implement it as a school, that would be so much more useful than every school doing their own thing.
I mean, I've got nothing to add. Parents and schools, I think, want it on a statutory footing to just take pressure off everyone.
Thank you very much. We will go to Serena now.
Thank you. So, would your members support a ban for social media for under 16s? And what would you say regarding the argument of at the age of 16, young people will face that cliff edge, they're likely to just have exams around the corner. So yes, if you could share your views, starting with Daniel.
Yeah, so I think it's around 90% of our members would support a ban of social media for under 16s. Obviously, their experience of social media, young people having access to it, is incredibly detrimental to young people and to their experience as teachers. I mean, what exists at the moment is like a wild west in which we have big tech giants harvesting young people's attention in the pursuit of profit. And our members would absolutely like to see this ban. I mean, our frustration actually is that this is something we could have led the world on, and we are behind the curve on real action on big tech. So I hope that we can see things move at much more pace.
Thank you, Tom.
Yes, we welcome the ban, but not a ban alone. We don't think it's enough. I think there is a genuine risk that when the ban comes in, that we see it that, okay, that's been done now, we've done that ban. And it's almost a get out of jail free card for these tech companies. It's got to be a ban and something. And I think we are more interested in what that and is. It's all the stuff we've been talking about. It's that risk-based approach that Rani talked about. It's the literacy and the education that comes around all of that. But we can't think that we get a ban through Parliament and then that's done.
Thank you. And Darren.
We've recently adopted a policy that supports a ban on access to social media for children under the age of 16 for some of the reasons that we've just heard and were discussed in the previous panel. I think one issue that is often raised in this context, and it was a balanced decision. I think the union looked at both sides of the argument and understood that some arguments against our position had some force. But I think in the final analysis, that does seem to be the most appropriate and effective way of protecting children from some of the harms that we've heard about. One issue that I think sometimes gets raised, and it's not an irrational point, is there a cliff edge? So children aren't accessing social media until the age of 16 and then suddenly they're able to access it. I think that argument perhaps overlooks the work that schools can do. We just talked about digital literacy, becoming more confident and more effective in online engagement, developing those skills and that understanding through education. So it's not a cliff edge. It's not you don't know anything about social media, you're then 16, you're then completely exposed to the whole world of social media. What you're doing before children reach the age of 16 is hopefully helping them develop the skills so that when they have the ability to access social media, they have that toolkit that enables them to do so and keep themselves as safe as possible.
Can I just pick on one? Because the cliff edge argument, I think, is a nonsense. There's a cliff edge at 18 when children are able to access alcohol. Yeah. We don't serve them wine, little doses of wine at lunchtime to get them used to it. What we can do is, of course, teach them about social media, but we need that digital literacy space. I'd also go further to add, what else do we need? We need a windfall tax on these big tech giants, and we need to invest that in child mental health services.
Manuela, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A new concern included in the government's consultation growing up in the online world was rightly the growth of AI chatbots. And children forming excessive reliance and connection to these devices, including using chatbots to ask for advice. Have your members come across these problems, and what are your views on possible age or time limit restrictions on the use of chatbots by children and young people? So, Daniel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, our membership, our profession are incredibly concerned about the young people and the use of AI chatbots, not just only in young people's sort of engagement with them, what it means for teaching and learning broadly as well. I think there's a real problem that the world is moving at such pace. We have not got the space to really educate around it effectively at the moment. And I think that's largely down to how schools are measured. And, you know, if we want to allow that space to have effective education on digital literacy and AI, I think we have to change how we do accountability, to be honest.
I'd come back to that point around digital literacy and education. I think it's about how you use those platforms in a healthy, sensible way, because they certainly have value. And again, you know, taking a risk-based approach to all of this would mitigate the fact that these things are moving more quickly than legislation will allow for. You know, these platforms will change and iterate in a way that laws just can't keep up with. So we have to take that risk-based approach coupled with education of young people and how to use them safely, effectively and ethically.
I think part of the use of AI chatbots for that purpose is because a child can't identify an alternative source of advice. So you go to whatever AI platform you're using and ask it for advice, and it does raise concerns, and it's something that our members have flagged. I think part of that is saying, how do we make sure that children do have an effective source of advice if they have something on their mind, if they're concerned, if they're anxious? That's why we've supported moves to have school-based counsellors available in every school, so that there is a trained counsellor who children can approach to discuss their concerns. So it may be driven by the fact that for many children, they've got no other source of advice, no one else they can talk to in confidence other than an AI chatbot, and that is quite distressing.
Thank you. We've talked about social media platforms, we've talked about AI chatbots. This committee recently hosted a group of primary school children in Parliament to talk to us about reading, and we've got a separate inquiry about reading for pleasure, and they were, most of them, really enthusiastic readers, and it was lovely to talk to them about their experience of reading. But partway through that session, the teacher said to them, we were talking about what some of the barriers to reading for pleasure might be, and the teacher said, well, there is something, isn't there, children, that a lot of you spend a lot of time on that might mean that you're not always reading at home. And what she was getting at, and the answer that came forthcoming, was Roblox. And so I just wonder if you could say a little bit about your members' experience of the impact of gaming platforms that also enable children to interact with each other, but are also enormously absorbing of their time on their education, and whether, as we're considering our response to the government's consultation on banning social media, whether it needs to, we talk about social media, whether actually the definition of what is within scope needs to be broader than what we would classify narrowly as social media platforms alone.
I think it's about identifying criteria you can apply to different platforms to see whether they should be in scope or not. And those kind of gaming platforms, children do spend a lot of time on them, and whether they should be in scope or not, I think is a legitimate question. I think there's a more fundamental question, though, which is around the amount of time. This perhaps reflects what we were saying before. How much time do children spend in front of a screen anyway, whether it's Roblox, whether it's something else? And I think this is a wider debate about the balance of screen time versus non-screen time in children's lives. But yes, I think that should be in scope, and it certainly should be considered.
Almost certainly, yes. I mean, we don't want to end up in a situation like Australia where they're just looking at 10 platforms and only those 10. It has to be broader than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring it into scope. Yep. Young people, particularly accessing things like that at a much younger age, where there is, also very little regulation or control.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We'll go to Peter. Final question.
As well as speaking to hundreds of adults in my constituency, speaking to my local schools, I've also tried to speak to as many young people as I can about this issue. And I think what strikes me whenever I do speak to young people about this, they actually raise huge concerns about social media and their own consumption of it themselves. Yeah. And whilst, I think the balance of those supporting a ban is probably slightly less strong in that age group, it's fair to say that they nevertheless do have concerns. They also raise sort of issues around their rights to access information, the freedom that they want to enjoy over their time and interests. How do we strike that balance between giving young people agency, supporting their independence, indeed supporting their ability to, for example, engage in current affairs, with safeguarding them from online harms?
Those are always balanced judgments with any kind of rights frameworks. If you take, for example, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and know a lot of those provisions are engaged when we have these discussions around balancing children's safety versus their rights. I think proportionality is quite important. Certainly our view would be that if you take Article 3, for example, of that convention, which is about the state's responsibility to act in the best interests of the child, that has particular weight. But children do have rights around data protection and privacy, and that, I think, is those issues are engaged around age assurance, for example. If children are sharing data to have their age assured, how is that protected? So yes, there are balances of rights that need to be considered here. But I think to some extent we haven't placed enough focus on that fundamental duty in the UNCRC, in the Children's Act 1989, and in all subsequent legislation, that the first consideration has to be how do we keep children safe and how do we protect them to a reasonable extent from harms and risks.
You're referencing there the digital age of consent, which is at 13 at the moment, but obviously it's fairly clear that social media platforms frequently allow or don't sufficiently block young people from accessing the services.
And I wonder there's a legitimate question around whether that age of consent was identified in a different world to the world that we're living in now.
Nothing to add.
So I met with quite a large group of students in Northern Ireland last week, and they were asking me questions, and they asked me about social media and what I thought we should do, and I said, I think we should ban it for under 16s, and there was this huge gasp. I think we have to remember that these are young people and we are the adults, and like tobacco or alcohol, social media is something that needs regulating because it is harmful, and it is incredibly harmful to young people. Now, when I do speak to young people about what they like about social media, is it provides them with some sort of community, and I think what we need to do is invest much more in making the real world their community. Youth clubs. I was speaking to a young LGBT person who was like, I've found social media useful because I've been able to meet other LGBT young people. We need to make the real world that safe space rather than these online unregulated spaces.
Specifically on that point, because it's something as a gay man who grew up at the start of the social media age, myself, it's something I think about a lot. There are challenges around creating that vision, particularly in rural and less connected communities, for smaller groups of individuals, young people who are questioning their sexual or gender identity, for example. I take the point that you're making, but is that always realistic and achievable?
So I know of a number of schools that sort of have LGBT clubs and so on. I think I would welcome that. Youth clubs have been so eroded. I mean that was one thing that was fascinating about Northern Ireland, actually, is that it was they still, all those young people still went to a youth club on a night time. We don't have that in England and Wales largely, and these are the spaces we need to create for young people rather than these isolated, atomised online worlds.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been really interesting for the committee to hear your evidence this morning. We would love it if you have any further thoughts or anything you weren't able to convey to us this morning. If you'd write to the committee afterwards, that would be great. I'm going to suspend the sitting now and ask members to be back shortly before 11:45 so we can start promptly with our third panel at 11:45. Order. Order. Welcome back to this third panel this morning of the Education Select Committee's evidence session on screen time and social media. We are unusually hearing evidence from three panels of witnesses this morning, and the third panel is just one witness from Snapchat, and the reason for that is that the witness was unable to attend the session that we held last week, where we also heard from other social media platforms. So we are very grateful to Jacqueline Boucher for taking the time to join us online this morning. Jacqueline Boucher, can I ask you to introduce yourself to the committee, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair, and hello all. My name is Jacqueline Boucher, and I serve as the Global Head of Platform Safety at Snap Inc., the company behind the popular visual messaging application Snapchat. Thank you for convening today's session and for the committee's flexibility and accommodation given last week's unforeseen circumstances that prevented Snap from participating with the other companies. My participation was confirmed 1 week ago, and we are happy to join today and look forward to providing our perspective on these critical issues.
Thank you very much. So our Prime Minister met one of your colleagues from Snap Inc. Very recently at Downing Street, along with other social media providers, to discuss children's use of social media. He told them that where social media use comes with real risks, looking the other way is not an option. Do you agree with that statement from our Prime Minister?
I do.
In terms of Snapchat, what is your company's assessment of the balance of harms that young people experience and encounter on your platform relative to any benefits that they derive from it?
Perhaps I could start, Chair, with a general explanation. Online safety and digital well-being for young people in particular are core priorities for us at Snap. And they have been from the beginning, which is evidenced by our safety by design approach. Snap was deliberately architected differently from inception, and that was nearly 15 years ago. Snapchat is primarily a private friend-to-friend messaging service, and the majority of time spent on Snapchat is in private messaging between and among friends. So those that typically know each other in the physical world. Snapchat was designed to enhance friendships with people that we already know in real life. It's not an ideal app for meeting new people and for sharing experiences with the entire world. In the UK, we reached 23 million people, and that includes 90% of 13 to 24-year-olds. And this is critical because we know that Snap's focus on interpersonal communications plays a positive role in young people's lives. Research that we supported that was conducted by King's College London specifically examined exactly what young people are doing on our platform. And it's clear that Snapchat plays a vital role in strengthening those social bonds between and among young people. Just by way of a couple of examples from that research, 80% of the young people aged 13 to 24 say that they stay in touch with friends on Snapchat that they don't often see in real life. It also helps 78% stay connected with close friends that they do see in real life. And 69% say that they use the platform to stay connected with family members. So the bottom line here is that not all platforms are the same, and Snapchat is in fact different from traditional social media.
And so my question was about the balance of harms to benefits. Can you talk about your company's understanding and articulation of the harms that young people encounter on your platform?
Well, as I mentioned, we've made these deliberate design choices from inception to help teens protect, particularly from unwanted contact. We conduct research every year in 6 countries, including the UK, and this is not research particular to Snapchat, but it's across platforms, across services, across devices. And we are asking 13 to 24-year-olds, and we're asking parents of teenagers what kind of risks they face online. And unwanted contact is something that comes up every year in every country. So unwanted contact is what we are trying to help protect teens from. And we have several features that help with that. Particularly, we require mutual friend acceptance. So teens can't receive a message from someone that they haven't affirmatively accepted as a friend or that they don't already have in their phone contacts. And on Snapchat, friend lists are private. There are no public profiles for under 16s. There are no public likes and public followers. These prevent people from coming into our lives without invitation or permission. All of this is going to help with the issues of unwanted contact. And then I would also offer that in multiple instances, we show in conversation warnings to teens about accepting new friends, because we know that risk can come from the people that we meet and the content that we are consuming and the content that we are sharing. So specifically, if a teen accepts a friend request from someone who, for instance, they might not share many mutual friends in common with, or might be outside of their geographic area, or if someone on the platform has been blocked or reported by others for non-egregious offenses, we ask that team if they can trust this person and if they still want to be friends with them. And I think it's important to note that in a given week, we display these in-app warnings more than 14.5 million times in the UK to 3 million UK users. And that results in nearly 45,000 blocks and 200 reports. And then finally, another piece that we have is our parental supervision tools. We offer parents and trusted adults visibility into who their teens are connecting with on Snapchat. Again, we know that the risks can come from the people that we meet, the people that we're interacting with, and the content that we are sharing and consuming. We allow those parents to see who their teens are connecting with and who is connecting with them in this family-centered suite of tools.
So forgive me, I've asked you twice now about your company's understanding of the harms that young people experience on your site, and you've only spoken about the measures that you have in place to protect them. Is it therefore for us to conclude that Snapchat doesn't accept that young people come to harm on your site? But and please, could you answer the question if that's not the case?
I'd like to point out the difference between risk and harm. I think anywhere in the world, in any population, there are going to be people who are up to no good, and that goes to online platforms as well. But there is a difference between risk and encountering risk and actually facing actual harm. So the risks range in our research shows anything from misinformation or disinformation to hate speech to cyberbullying to harassment to sexual harms to even suicide and self-harm kind of content being available. This is the case on all platforms, all services, all devices. And if I could just finish the one point about the parental tools, we have made available a new online safety learning program for teens and their parents, and it is now embedded into the platform in these parental supervision tools. It's called The Keys, and a lot of platforms have online safety awareness raising and educational materials, but this one is different because it is leaning in particularly to those harms that young people could face online today and some of the most challenging issues. They are on Snapchat, they are on all platforms. Chair, these are whole of society issues that we are dealing with. They are not particular to technology, but technology is certainly manifesting them and amplifying them. So the unique harms that we are dealing with in this learning program are illicit drug activity and financial sextortion and the consequences and risks of sharing nudes and intimate imagery online and cyberbullying and harassment. It's not by any means the be all end all, but it's something that we're leaning into to make sure that we are arming young people, arming their parents with what they need to know about these issues.
So we're going to drill in now to some more of the detail on what the experience that this committee has heard about from parents and from some of the research organisations that are independent about the experience that young people have on your platforms. Manuela, do you want to come in very briefly, if that's okay, because Jess has got an important question next on that.
So I actually have currently, I'm dealing with a case of one of my constituents who have received disgusting, distressing, misogynist messages on your platform on Snapchat. And it was also difficult for the parent carers to actually report this as well. And I think we're gonna look into it. So for me, Snapchat doesn't feel as a safe place for our children and young people. And what are you doing then to identify this abuse proactively? And the key word here is proactively. Abuse, harmful content like the one that my constituent has been affected with, and also how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your measures if you have any?
So thank you for raising the constituent matter. Our trust and safety team investigated and took appropriate actions on the count involved.
Sorry, I just want to say my constituent is 13.
We briefed your office earlier today, and to protect the privacy of those impacted, particularly minors, we think that further details are best handled offline. But I do want to emphasize that we take reports of harm extremely seriously, and we act swiftly to address them. To your other question, I would note that sadly, there is no ensuring the safety of users anywhere online, any more than there's anyone's safety can be ensured in the physical world. That's why at SNAP, we embrace these twin objectives of risk mitigation and harm reduction. We've already noted the safety by design approach that we assume from inception, and that's exactly when safety by design is appropriate. That's the exact application when a platform is being designed. We also employ proactive and reactive measures because we're determined to make Snapchat a hostile environment for any kind of illegal activity or violating activity of our community guidelines. So we conduct, or we have in place, as I mentioned, the cross-industry annual research. We have aggressive policies that specifically detail what is permitted on Snapchat and what is not, and they are enforced consistently. We have these innovative detection approaches because we are trying to get upstream. We are trying to confront these bad actors and identify this type of potential harm before it can become an issue. We have awareness raising and educational efforts underway that I also shared. We have these in-app warnings, we have prompts, we have tools for blocking and reporting and removing. We make Family Center available for parents and trusted adults. And we also support law enforcement in their efforts to bring bad actors to justice.
And despite all of those measures that you're talking to us about extensively, young people are still coming to harm on Snapchat, and I think Jess has got some statistics that that we'd like to ask you about, the evidence that is the case.
Analysis by the NSPCC, which is a major child protection charity here in the UK, which looked at police data for sexual communication with a child, offences ranked Snapchat clearly first among platforms being used. Of 2,111 offences in 2024-25, where the police identified a platform, 40% of those cases were on Snapchat. You said just now that Snap adopted a safety by design approach from the very start. If that was the case, how on earth is child sexual abuse material being asked from children being groomed to produce child sexual abuse material for offenders? How has that ever been possible on your platform if it takes a safety by design approach? And how can the parents, the public and children themselves using your platform have confidence that they can be safe in the face of this devastating data?
I'm well aware of the NSPCC's efforts and this research that they do on an annual basis. And we have been in discussion with them for a couple of years now, actually looking into the methodology as to how they survey police forces and what police forces are identifying as SNAP as being involved in some of these cases. I would posit that perhaps they are not always looking at SNAP as the platform at issue, but the platform that could be implicated in some other way. There are often
You're denying this police data exists on communication, sexual communication with a child offences being related to anything to do with SNAP.
I am not denying that. I'm just saying I would like a little more closer examination of the data to make sure that it is in fact what it purports to be. I'm not saying that this does not take place on Snapchat. We understand that these issues arise, and we
literally heard a witness just earlier, Esther Ghey, talk about a close friend of hers whose child was invited to a forum where there were children who were nude, and that was illegal child sexual abuse material. We literally just heard it today. So even one case is too many, surely.
Indeed, absolutely, 100% agree. One case is too many.
So why don't you just ensure that your app, when it's used by children, is nudified by default, right? So you just ban any kind of sharing or receiving of nude pictures. Why? I mean, we know that that's technologically possible. Why don't you just put that on right here, right now? So it's just not possible for a child to do that.
We have a number of efforts underway that we'll be able to share hopefully later on in the coming months or what have you. But I would like to say that there is a difference between what's going on in private chat versus the more public side of the app. The private chat portion of Snapchat is really the 21st century equivalent of a telephone call. And we can't dive into what's happening in that private chat any more than we can listen in on what's going on a telephone call. So we really do rely on people reporting to us if there are bad actors, if there is bad behavior going on the platform.
The difference, of course, is that if we're talking about a telephone call, on a landline, that would happen in a child's home where there were other people around. So does that statement that you just made about Snap being unable to police communications between your users in private not directly contradict your statement that this is safe by design for children?
Safety by design measures are incorporated from inception. That means trying to determine how a platform could be misused or abused. Those considerations were taken into account 15 years ago. I would hope the committee would agree that the online safety risk landscape has evolved markedly over the past 15 years. I, for one, have been involved more than 25 years, and it has evolved markedly. I would love to go back to the days of when it was just spam and phishing that we were contending with. Now there are some very real serious issues that we need to confront as a total society. Yes, platforms are presenting problems because we are providing that instrumentality. We take these issues very seriously. We take our responsibility very seriously. But these bad actors have to be addressed in other aspects and other areas of society as well. This is very much a joint responsibility.
Okay, can I just interrupt for a second, because I know that there are plenty of colleagues who want to ask their questions. It is absurd that 15 years ago, the sharing of child sexual abuse material was not a problem. It was. There were issues right from the very design of the internet and then social media platforms involving illegal child sexual abuse material, and these issues were raised consistently by child protection organisations, by security organisations like the police. So your safety by design from the start ignored these very serious issues of protecting children. And I'm sorry, but it's just absurd that you think that this is something that has appeared just in the last few years when we know that is simply not the case. You can't have a safety by design system that doesn't think about child sexual abuse.
And if I may, I would say that unfortunately, child sexual exploitation and abuse has been that thread that has been consistent throughout my career in child protection. And these are things that we are employing all of the resources that are available in terms of we use photo DNA to detect known child sexual abuse material. And we are doing this in private chat. When someone uploads to the camera roll, from the camera roll to Snapchat, we are making sure that that is not child sexual exploitation and abuse imagery. We are also employing Google's Content Safety API. We are employing Google's CSAI match. We are employing all of these technologies to try to determine if those images exist and to get them off the platform. They have no place on Snapchat. They have no place in the online world, and we want to protect children.
Thank you.
But again, these are things that we've done from the beginning and since those technologies have been available.
We'll go to Peter Swallow next.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. The reason Snap was not able to provide a witness at last week's committee session was because it was laying off 16% of its workforce, aiming to use AI to reduce costs by £368 million a year. What assurances can you give this committee that as part of those workforce changes, Snap will not be reducing staffing in its safeguarding teams?
To my knowledge, the safety teams, the trust and safety teams, were not impacted by those changes.
So could you just explain, you're obviously in charge of platform safety at a global level. Could you explain what the structure of Snap is here in the UK? What team you have here in the UK who's working in country to provide safety on your platform, and ensuring that, you know, when for example families have concerns and are raising them, they are being handled within country?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. We have a trust and safety team that is based in London. I couldn't tell you exactly how many people it is, but it's a fairly large team. Every time I am in London, I sit with that team to sit in the queues to see what kind of reports are coming in, to make sure that we are reviewing them accordingly. But we have a dedicated team. We do have a follow the sun model, as most companies do at Snap. And we make sure that we have trust and safety teams around the world working 24/7, around the clock, around the globe. But we do have a dedicated team in London.
You said you can't give us exact numbers and you can't give us a complete reassurance that it won't be affected by workforce changes. Could you write to the committee, please, on both of those points, confirming how large the team is here in the UK and whether it's being affected by any workforce changes?
Again, to my knowledge, it is not being affected. It has not been affected, but we can give you the exact numbers of the folks that are in London on trust and safety. Yes, and I would like to point out that it's not just a specific trust and safety team that works on trust and safety or works on safety issues. This is a fundamental part of Snapchat, and there are people across disciplines, across functions at the company, whether that be legal or communications or outreach or advocacy or product and engineering and trust and safety and operations and outreach. There are numerous functions and disciplines, and we work in a cross-functional way, a cross-functional team. And safety is really part of everyone's role at Snap.
Well, there are now 16% fewer people working on that. On the point around AI, your co-founder and CEO said that a new way of working that is faster and more efficient is now needed, and presumably referring there to AI and other solutions. What assurances can you give us that safety of children can be made faster and more efficient through the use of AI and other technologies? You've already sort of been pushed on, for example, making sure that technology is being implemented to identify intimate images. What other sort of technologies are you looking to introduce, and how will you make sure that relying on AI and other systems will make your systems more safe and not less safe?
Our trust and safety teams are employing AI in a variety of ways, particularly to help moderate content. On the public side of the app, they use moderation and AI to determine if something is in violation of our community guidelines. And it's also moderated before it can reach a large audience. That's why I think you would see that having something go viral, having content go viral on Snapchat is not something that you often hear about. And we are also using AI on the private side of the app to look into various keywords, phrases, other material that's used to be able to identify potentially violating content. And all of this will continue, and it will be ramped up with AI agents and other things. It's been happening for some time now, but we're confident, but we always have a human in the loop. I think that's important to note. It's not that these are just AI systems taking over. Always there are humans in the loop to be able to review this material, and particularly for more serious cases or egregious cases.
Not to press you on this point, but it is really important. And we've been referring a lot to intimate images, and given the number of young people on your platform, you'll appreciate why this is particularly important. You mentioned they're using AI to search for keywords and other linguistic markers within private messaging. Is it the case? Is it the case that at the moment, today, in terms of private messaging, there is no checks going on in terms of the images being shared?
Sorry, the keywords and the phrases and the emojis, the emoji strings, all of that is leveraged in the public side of the app. If I said something else, I misspoke. On the private side of the app with the images, as I mentioned earlier, we do leverage photo DNA, and we are looking for known illegal images, and we're doing that through hash matching, of course, through photo DNA. And that is going on in the private side of the app in terms of media to make sure that known child sexual exploitation and abuse material is not being shared.
Do your rules for using the platform, that they presumably apply equally in both public and private parts of your app?
The community guidelines, yes. And there are actually more community guidelines specific to what we call snap stars. So those influencers and those others that are on the platform on the public side, they have stricter rules to adhere to as well.
What you're seeming to set out to the committee is that the way that you enforce those community guidelines and that you ensure that the content being served on your platform is both within those guidelines and, of course, more broadly within the law, is much more strongly monitored and enforced in the public side of your app than the private side of the app. Is that fair?
Again, I'm saying that in the private side of the app, as I represented to the previous member, that is very much a hard line for Snapchat. Privacy is very important. The app was built around privacy to really mimic and simulate real life kinds of conversations. But we rely heavily on reporting to us as to what might be going on in private chat. If that is content that's being shared that's inappropriate or behaviors that are taking place that are inappropriate, we rely on that being reported to us. But we are employing certain techniques and detection mechanisms. If the committee would like specific details, we can follow up with that in writing as well. And
again, I don't want to take too much of the committee's time, but I think this is really important and quite alarming. That is your position, regardless of whether the user is under 16, under 18, or at any age. Your position is that privacy trumps safety.
There is no trumping. These are two domains and two issues that work hand in hand, hand in glove. Privacy and safety are basically two sides of the same coin. One can't exist without the other. We don't see them as in tension with one another. We see them as complementary to one another. And that's why privacy by design and safety by design were so instrumental in Snapchat's formation.
Thank you. I think we might be struggling with the logic of that when it comes to children and their ability to exchange messages in private. But we will go to Chris Vince for the next question.
Thank you, Chair. So the UK communications regulator, Ofcom, reported among 13 and 14-year-olds in the UK who were using Snapchat, they spent an average of 2 hours, well, basically 2.25 hours a day on your platform. When we heard from other social media companies last week, they said they had specific tools like curfews, and you've mentioned previously some parental controls as well. Do you have anything on Snapchat that sort of, for example, we heard about, warning images, warning messages coming up reminding you that you've been on it for an X amount of time, that it was nighttime, you should probably go to bed. Do you have controls like that on your platform?
I would posit that time spent on an app is a bit of a false indicator. A teen, for example, might have a really bad day and they might spend a couple of hours in a video chat with a friend, very similar to a telephone call for older generations of years past. And then the next day, those two teens might exchange just a few messages. And this is underscored by some recent research from University of Manchester. experts have repeatedly told us that what is most important is how teens spend time online, what they do and who they do it with, not so much the time spent. So this is basically quality over quantity.
Not when as well, though, Jacqueline, because would you not suggest if that was for example, if it was 2 hours at 2 o'clock in the morning and you've got school the next day, that would be an issue. So I really want to press on this idea of curfews and saying that actually you shouldn't be on Snapchat at 2 o'clock in the morning. So have you got anything like that?
So we do have the ability for parents to see in Family Center where their teen is spending time on the app and how much time is being spent in what portion of the app. And I would just caution one note about the curfews. Sometimes we have been counseled by external experts, particularly those that work in suicide and self-injury, saying to us that if there is a curfew at 10 o'clock, if a child is at risk in a risky situation, that might be the only time that they could actually reach out to someone that they need to talk to. So I would just bring that other level of dimension into the conversation. So it is something that needs to be nuanced and discussed at a finer level. For the majority of young people, that is the case. Lights should be out, phones should be off, sleep should be had. But
you have no specific tools. You have no specific tools on Snapchat for that. I mean, you agree on the premises on it, but there's no specific tool that will say to a young person, you've been on, it's as you say, it should be lights out. You've got no tool like that at a specific hour.
And as I said, it's because it's a very different experience on Snapchat than it is on some of the other platforms. We don't have this endless scroll of seemingly unending feeds of unmoderated content. A teen might pick up the phone several times a day for snapping and for messaging, but not necessarily going to stay on for hours at a time. But we do, again, have that feature in Family Center where parents and trusted adults can see who the teen is connecting with, how much time they're spending on any particular portion of the app, whether that's the camera or messaging. That's where the bulk of the time is spent for the bulk of our users, as opposed to some of the other features.
Thank you. On the kind of the point we've sort of circled around, a number of social media companies we spoke to last week were in, I would say, denial about how addictive their apps was. Having worked with, been a teacher and worked with young people, I know of the sort of the desperation from young people have to get their streaks up. In fact, I had one young person who was frustrated they had a detention because they weren't going to get their streak in that day. So would you recognise that there is an element of addictiveness to Snapchat, and do you think this is potentially damaging to young people?
So if you'd like to talk about streaks, I'm happy to address streaks. You should know that they're only visible to the two people in the streak. They are wholly optional. They are intended as a means of celebrating and maintaining friendships. So friendships need care and feeding, and these kinds of regular interactions help to build and deepen those friendships. We've heard directly from our community that streaks are They sort of create a shared sense of commitment, and they add this fun element to when it comes to celebrating friendships that they know that they need to nourish on a daily basis. In North America, we have thousands of Snapchat users that have streaks of more than 2,500 days. And that means that they've communicated with the same friend every day for nearly 7 years. You should also note that we don't send push notifications with regard to streaks, and we've extended the window for streaks as to when they expire. So
you have, though, faced legal action, is my understanding, in New Mexico and USA about basically with accusations that your platform is designed to be addictive. So how would you respond to that?
We don't see it as such. It wasn't designed to be addictive. It was designed to enhance friendships between people who know each other in real life, both friends and family members. Anything could probably rise to that level, but that's not how we look at the platform. I'm not a medical professional, but I would note that I do deal with our 19-member Global Safety Advisory Board. I lead and manage that effort specifically, and they counsel us on these types of issues from medical professionals, academics, researchers, and we know that scientists and researchers urge caution when using the term addiction.
Can I just push you on, or put to you that time for all of us is a limited resource. So 2 hours and 13 minutes a day for 13 and 14-year-olds living in the UK spent on Snapchat is 2 hours 13 minutes that those children are not spending outdoors, enjoying exercise, are not spending in real life with their friends, are not spending reading for pleasure, are not spending interacting with their parents and other family members. Do you really think that 2 hours and 13 minutes a day on your platform for an average 13 and 14-year-old in the UK who's a Snapchat user is the best possible use of that limited resource of their time?
Again, I would caution quality as opposed to quantity. We've been told even by members.
I'm really sorry. We are talking specifically about the quantity here. I'm talking specifically about the 2 hours and 13 minutes of UK 13 and 14-year-olds who are Snapchat users that they are spending on your platform and not doing other activities which we know are beneficial for them. And I'm asking you the direct question, yes or no answer. Do you think that those 2 hours and 13 minutes on Snapchat are the best possible use of time for those 13 and 14-year-olds? The quantity, not the quality.
Yes, and I can't answer that for every young person out there, because I think it's often lost on adults. And we hear this from our teen council. We have a council across Europe that includes members from the UK as well. They tell us that is underappreciated and unknown by adults that the bulk of their time on Snapchat is spent doing homework. So we would really have to dive into the individual cases. We can't just make a blanket statement that 2 hours and 13 minutes is good or bad or otherwise. These are highly nuanced issues, and I would really encourage the committee to really address them as such.
Ms. Bouquet, can I just say, as a former teacher...
I can't do that. We've got time to get through, and I'm going to go to Mark for his next question. Yeah, that's okay. Mark.
No. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Jacqueline, for your answers so far. How would you assess the proposals to introduce a ban on social media for under 16s in the UK, which would almost certainly include your platform, Snapchat?
Sure. So when it comes to bans and restrictions, I think it's important to keep in mind that, as I said, not all platforms are architected the same. And as we were just discussing, not all teens of the same age are of the same maturity level. So I went to Australia and visited in August of 2024 before they were considering their action. And I argued at the time, and I would still say here today, that we feel that decisions about a teen's readiness for social media are best left to families and should really consider a variety of factors: the teen's age, the teen's maturity level, executive functioning skills, the family's values. And in fact, there's nothing right now precluding parents and families from holding off on giving access to social media for their teens if they so choose. The most important question to ask about a blanket ban is, will it truly improve safety for teens? And many online safety experts are against blanket bans. There were more than 150 such organizations in Australia that came out in opposition to a ban. But still, Australia was determined to be this world first mover. And in doing so, I think they hastened the law's passage and its implementation. And early indications suggest that it is proving difficult to enforce.
Well,
and it might even be urging circumvention, thereby driving to unregulated spaces.
One of the reasons that I think people are finding it difficult to enforce, at least at first, is that your organisation has been accused of malign compliance with the law in Australia. We've heard evidence that your organisation isn't doing anything to get young people off Snapchat who are below the age of 16 in Australia. And in fact, we know for certain that you're being investigated by the Australian e-safety commissioner for non-compliance with that ban. What would you say to that? And what reassurance can you give this committee that if the UK brings in the same ban, you'll actually comply with it?
That is wholly untrue. We are exercising all due measures. In Australia, as you know, we have to take reasonable steps as a platform. We have so far to my knowledge, removed 450,000 under 16s from the platform. They are circumventing the rules. They are coming back and trying to get back on the platform. We now have another effort underway where another 147,000 are going to be removed. And half of those were removed already and have to be removed again because they're circumventing these types of interventions. I would say that no ban is ever going to be 100% effective unless we have reliable, predictable, age assurance and age verification technology. That does not exist now. There are efforts underway. There are many efforts underway with respect to age verification and age assurance, but it's not as easy as it sounds.
Okay.
And young people are circumventing these measures.
Yeah, so while I appreciate that you've either rejected or pushed back on many of the statistics and evidence that we've used this morning and this afternoon in our questioning, we do know that Australia's E-Safety Commissioner did publish a report that found that prior to the 10th of December 2025, nearly 70% of all parents were still reporting that their children were on the platform. So that would suggest that you aren't doing enough to get them off there. And in your earlier answer, when you said it wasn't true, it does kind of suggest that it is true that you're not doing enough to get children off your platform.
We are in close communication with the Australian E-Safety Commissioner and her office, and we are being monitored on a regular basis as to what we are doing. We are constantly evolving our techniques. We are constantly evolving our processes. Again, the baseline was reasonable steps. I would posit that we are going far beyond reasonable steps.
I know
But parents, I think if you want to compare data, we also saw data from the E-Safety Commissioner some time ago that many parents were on these platforms, many teens were on these platforms with the consultation of their parents and with the permission of their parents, and they were underage.
Well, all I'll say is that I hope that when such a ban, or if such a ban does come in force in the UK, that you will comply with it fully and that you'll make every effort to get every child under the age of 16 off your platform. I know that Darren has a question to follow up on.
Thank you. Ms. Boucher, you've described a number of measures. You have brought us back to the intent and the design that you claim make Snapchat safe for children. Such that you're asking us to believe there is a balance where we can say, rather than being unsafe or having significant unsafe elements, Snapchat is safe. If that were the case, can you explain why countries around the world, from Malaysia to France to this country, are considering and implementing restrictions on most children having access to those sites? Whatever we think of governments, we generally don't have the time, resource or energy to go around banning things that don't need banning or restricting things where it would be a waste of time. So what is your view on why entire governments and nation states are taking action on precisely the kind of sites that you run?
I would note that I'd like to get away from the word safe, 100% safe. I think I've talked about that earlier. We have to make the difference between risk mitigation and harm reduction. That is our main goal. We want to make sure that we are making a distinction between actual risks and actual harms. Risk exists. Risk exists in every facet of life. And unfortunately, harm does as well. There is never going to be any absolute state of being as 100% safe online or offline. So we have to, again, focus on risk mitigation and harm reduction. Okay. I would think that in terms of the other part of your question about the various governments looking into this, there is a campaign of sorts by individuals that are coming out against social media, are coming out against online platforms, and are passing the idea or are voicing the idea of bans and so forth. It also has to do with the notion of problematic use, what some might call addiction, but there is, again, urgent caution around that term as per scientists and researchers. But there is an active campaign in this regard. I personally don't think a blanket ban is the way to go. I think there are other ways to address these issues, and they have to be taken in a collaborative way across a variety of sectors, across a variety of actors. For instance, I don't think that we do enough to really instill in young people critical thinking. They have to have critical thinking. They have to have this executive function. They are going to encounter risk. That's going to happen online. That's going to happen in real life. They have to know what to do with it once they encounter it.
Thank you. I'm going to just move us on to final few questions about the government's consultation. So the government's consultation asks respondents about restricting functions like disappearing messages and location settings. Both of those things are kind of quite fundamental features of Snapchat. Would those such restrictions, if they were introduced in the UK, not completely undercut your platform's operation?
I'm sorry, could you
if it was not permissible to have disappearing messages and location sharing on Snapchat, how would your platform work?
It's primarily a messaging platform. Location sharing on the Snap Map, that is off by default for all users. If users weren't going to share their location, that's one thing that they would not have to opt into. But I don't think it destroys the notion of the platform, because again, it's primarily around private messaging between individuals.
And disappearing messaging.
So again, Snapchat was designed to mimic real life, and messages that delete by default, that's basically not creating this verbatim transcript. And by that, we're demonstrating the value that we give to private communications. We have a 24-hour retention, and we also have now an infinite retention. These are options for message preservation. So I don't think default is an issue.
So at the moment, if snaps are being used to bully, harass, or groom children on your platform, but they disappear, how can they be made available to the police or education authorities or parents or anybody else who wants to look in detail and be able to investigate exactly what harms their children are coming to?
So we always tell young people, parents, and others, disappearing messages doesn't necessarily equate to disappearing evidence. It's always important to reach out to Snapchat. We tell this to law enforcement as well. It's always important to reach out to Snapchat to see if we have data, to see if we have information that could help with a particular case or help with a particular situation. That's why we really encourage people to report to us if something is going on in private chat that we are not aware of, to make it known to us, whether there's a bad actor, bad conduct, what have you. So.
And you've heard from members of this committee this morning direct experiences of how they do get in touch and then nothing happens.
I would like to know that they do get in touch and they're asking. Sometimes information will be available, sometimes data will be available, sometimes it will not. But again, just because the messages disappear doesn't mean that the evidence does necessarily.
And then just finally on location sharing, we know that, of course, as you have said, location sharing can be off and it might be off by default, but that isn't the norm. In my experience as a parent of a teen, in the experience of lots of parents of teens, it's not the norm that teen users have location sharing off. And I think it's a common experience that our teens experience often profound distress, for example, from being able to see that their friends are gathered in a location and they were not invited to be there, or that something's happening that they don't know about. So aside from the very serious types of harm that we've talked about today, about children experiencing unwanted content and sexual content and so on, I just want to ask about that kind of fundamental feature, whether you think it's a good thing for the mental health and well-being of our children and young people, that they can see information that might cause them distress, that isn't necessarily harmful content, but is a fundamental feature of the way that they use your platform.
Again, the location sharing on the Snap app, off by default for all users, including under 18s. It's also a double opt-in feature. So you have to opt in at the device level, you have to opt in at the app level. We sometimes hear that young people might see where their friends are gathering and they're not there, or and they're not invited. That happens in real life as well. You're invited to a party, you're not invited to a party.
But it really doesn't. It really doesn't. If you're at home and you're not online, you don't know what your friends who are at their homes or absent from you are doing. You're relieved from that emotional pressure when it's the weekend, when you're not together with your friends. You don't know. That's the whole point. And on Snapchat, children can see things that cause them distress when they're in the private space of their own home. And it is one of the things that gives us cause to believe that platforms such as yours are eroding the mental health and well-being of our children and young people, because they are precisely subject to all of those social pressures 24 hours a day with no respite from them.
And Snapchat was designed to relieve those social pressures. Our founders were some of the first people to grow up with social media, and they weren't enamored by what they were seeing. That's why they wanted to make a more private app, a more private experience where you could share things and moments in the moment with the people that matter most, family and friends. So there might be some issues with particular smaller features within Snapchat that some may take issue with, but it is not by any means the entire totality of the app.
And I think there will be parents listening to this evidence session across the country whose experience with their own children and young people is profoundly at odds with the arguments that you've made to us today. But that brings us to the end of our evidence session, and we are grateful to you for coming, and particularly grateful to you for the early start that you've had on the other side of the Atlantic, and thank you very much for that. That brings us to the end of our public evidence session for today. Order, order.